Hello and welcome to the formal review. Today, we will be having a very special episode. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the formal review. This is episode 48, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. This is the part 2 of the 2019 film season recap, and as a reminder, these episodes do not cover any movies that will be released in 2020, such as Bad Boys for Life. I will be discussing the films that I haven't talked about before. Now let's get started. So growing up in the 1990s, Mr. Rogers was a part of my childhood. I never regarded him as high as others, but I did like him a lot. As I've gotten older, I've grown to appreciate him more and more as he dealt with very intense topics like race and other word problems, but for children. This film does this, but really for adults, as the entire film feels similar to an episode of his television show, which was completely different from my expectations going into this film. I really went into this film thinking it was going to be similar to the biopics of the past, and I was really pleasantly surprised. The film tells a message of forgiveness in the same way that the television show did for children. This style was so graceful, and it really made me feel like a child again. I do not feel that this film was about Roger's life per se, but more about who he was. He liked to talk to people to get them to know it was okay to talk about their feelings. The story's not even about Rogers. It's about a journalist who was interviewing him at the time. There's some truth to the story, as it was based on a journalist who did a profile on Rogers, and he has said that meeting Rogers changed his entire perspective on life. However, even with that truth aspect, it never feels like a story is the one that they are talking about. The story and the message can be applied to a lot of people's lives, and the message is absolutely heartwarming. Both Matt Reese and Tom Hanks are strong in their respective roles, with the obvious highlight going to Hanks. He's a real scene stealer every time he's on screen. He may not be the main character of the film's overall story, but the film 100% represents who he was as a person. The film was such a beautiful tribute to the man and really never becomes dull or sappy. Some critics say that the film could have delved more into his religious background, but Rogers himself rarely spoke about his faith on television. He did think that teaching was as powerful as preaching, and I quote, "You don't need to speak overtly about religion in order to get the message across." The film may be a little slow for some, but if that is the only problem with this film, that is a preference-based opinion. The message can really speak to a lot of people, and that was a great choice by the director, Marielle Heller. This movie treats, like I said, the entire story like an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and for that reason alone, 5 out of 5 bow ties. So I saw the 1994 version of Little Women years ago, but I don't remember much of it. I remember it being good, but it never really affected me in a huge way. From what I've read and how much that film was such an inspiration to a lot of people, Greta Gerwig had an uphill battle to not only outdo Lady Bird from last year, but also to please the fans of the 1994, which is lauded by a lot of people. Gerwig has all of her women very well developed and are played wonderfully by the stellar cast led by Saoirse Ronan, Emma Watson, and Florence Pugh, with Ronan and Pugh being the highlight. Ronan gives a very powerful edge, and Pugh is absolutely phenomenal as Amy, and there are multiple scenes that really show their acting prowess. Watson is good here, but I don't think she was giving a lot of great acting scenes. I wasn't a fan of the overall unconventional storytelling structure that kind of jumps across time in a non-chronological order, from Joe's childhood to adulthood without really any indication. I was confused at times, but that probably go away if I rewatch this film, but that probably won't happen. I personally did not have any real attachment to these characters, to no fault of their own, so rewatching it will be hard, but at the end of the day, it is a very well made and enjoyable film. 4 out of 5 bow ties. Pain and Glory is a very slow film that analyzes how the influence of childhood can affect someone's life, and how sometimes we forget and sometimes are fortunate to remember the passion, love, and sexual pleasure adventures can impact our lives, how relationships with our mothers can continue to impact and change us even after their death, and last but not least, how body and emotional pain are interconnected and how increasingly numb doctors, prescription, and non-prescription drugs are making people numb while occasionally triggering them to remember and regain their source of passion by chance. Antonio Banderas plays a fictional version of Almodovar who becomes becomes addicted to heroin because he has a lot of chronic health problems, but this movie is not really about that drug addiction. It is about this man who rediscovers his art as the film shows his memories of his childhood with his mother, played wonderfully by Penelope Cruz. While not all of this is the true story of Almodovar's life, you can see passion into this film from both him and Antonio Banderas, and a lot of the story applies to both of them. The character that Banderas plays is named Malo, and he is a very complex character, so much that he could be compared to a lot of character study films such as The Joker, Taxi Driver, and the other films of that nature. I really think that the acting by Banderas is fantastic, and the cinematography is so great, and so is the direction by Almodovar. I have not seen any of his other films, but if this film is any indication of that, I will be definitely checking out more films by him. 4.5 out of 5 bow ties. So when I first saw the trailer to this movie, I was very conflicted because I thought that this was a movie that I didn't really need to see because it was a biopic of a story that I didn't really care about. The story told me everything. I knew exactly what type of movie it was going to be, and that's exactly what I got out of it. But I still enjoyed myself. I thought the acting was fairly well done. Matt Damon did a really good job. So did Christian Bale. Though I do think that Christian Bale really didn't show his acting ability too well in this film, and he may have changed his regional British accent, but that's really it. But I think the main reason why I thought this film was enjoyable was James Mangold's direction. He actually had me invested in the story when they got to the races. I really did want Christian Bale's character to win. Now, is this a movie that I would rewatch over and over again? No. Is it a movie that I would buy? No, it's not really a story that I really care too much about. Now, if it was on television and it was just playing, I wouldn't turn it off. Or if somebody else was watching it, I wouldn't tell them, oh, this is a bad movie, why are we watching this? It's just one that's like, okay, it's good, yeah, but I have no investment in this story. And I don't really care about this event because it's not a biopic made about a significant event that really changed society, and not just American society, the world. You don't really do very much but I would say this film is still very enjoyable, and I think that's mostly due to James Mangold's direction. 4 out of 5 bow ties.
Voting isn't just going to the polls anymore on Election Day. Options like early voting, mail-in voting, and ballot drop boxes are available to more voters and are growing in popularity. How to Vote is a tool created by Democracy Works, and it breaks down the options your state offers by forecasting a ballot, empowering you to decide where and when to vote. Democracy works best when we all vote, but misinformation and confusion about election procedures have resulted in low voter turnout. How to Vote takes the guesswork out of the voting process. It is easy to use and helps folks from all over the country overcome many of the process barriers to voting. It is committed to helping you vote no matter what. You can use the How to Vote tool to sign up for election reminders, see what's on your ballot, get step-by-step assistance requesting your mail ballot, explore your options for returning your mail-in ballot, check your voter registration status, and find your local polling site, and make sure that you have an appropriate ID to bring with you. Decide when and where you'll vote this year at howto.vote.
For the Me Too movement, it was Roger Ailes, the Fox News CEO. In 2016, Gretchen Carlson filed a lawsuit against the former Fox News CEO, and other women, including Megyn Kelly, who was the network's biggest star at that point, came forward with tales of their own. He ultimately denied the accusations, but he was then paid $40 million to resign. Why do I know this story very well? Because it just happened 4 years ago. To me, this seemed a little rushed. I think, in general, biopics are meant to remember a story that happened a long time ago, relatively speaking. I feel that this story happened a little fast, but before anyone gets mad about that, I think the same thing about any Iraq war film. I agree, obviously, that these things that's shown in this film should not happen to women, and I know the importance of why these stories should be told. However, this story was told to us when it happened less than 4 years ago. Anyone who was not around then, or was quote-unquote too young to remember, is now too young to remember, or too young to really understand, respectively. I can't tell you that there's a precise cutoff date, but there's gotta be something here, because then it's just retelling the same story over and over again, and then it loses its impact, in my opinion. Having said all that, the film's story, I think, is very engaging and cringeworthy at times. The director, Roach, and writer Randolph are really able to keep the story fairly fresh, light, and really gut-wrenching at times. And this really does make sense because Randolph was one of the award-winning writers on The Big Short. While I did not like that film, I thought the writing was very good. But I do think this film is much better and much more enjoyable. But I use that term enjoyable very loosely because the topic is obviously very heavy. I think the stars of this film are clearly Theron and Lithgow as Kelly and Ailes, respectively. Both people feel and look like the people they're portraying, and with the former being so like her real-life counterpart that one could really forget that she isn't the real version. She is really able to capture Kelly's tone of voice, toughness, and ability to keep herself strong-willed. I think Kidman as Carlson is also very good, and so is Robbie as the fictional Kyla, who is based off of multiple women's stories with Ailes instead of just one. I'm usually not the biggest fan of Robbie's acting, but here she's able to go through a very strong character arc from a wide-eyed true believer in Fox News' mission statement to this whistleblower in comparison to the other women in the story. At the same time, however, this is the biggest flaw with the movie. Aside from her story, the majority of the women's stories are told to the audience and not really shown. This film has a lot of dialogue, and maybe the reason the audience had not shown anything is because the incidences that they're describing are too awful to show. However, that makes the film feel longer than it needs to be. Does it really make it an awful film? No, definitely not. The acting and the makeup are phenomenal in this movie and really make the worth price of admission. 4 out of 5 bow ties. So like all Eastwood films, this is a no-nonsense production, with very little way of showing special effects or anything that detracts from telling the story he wants to tell. And it really does have some terrific performances. I think Hauser, who plays the Taijil Luo, does a very good job showing one that he's a person that is very overzealous about becoming a police officer, but he does it because he wants to protect people. It's shown in the movie many times, such as when he goes to a gig in Centennial Park, he has a cooler of soft drinks and water bottles which he gives to the other police officers who have been standing in the heat, and then he will give it to who he thinks may need it. Kathy Bates does a very good job here shining as his mother, and Sam Rockwell does another stellar performance as the lawyer with a spotty history. Olivia Wilde also does really well as Kathy Struggs, the one who broke the story of the FBI suspicions about Jewel. However, I'm not the biggest fan of how she was able to get the scoop. I won't go into full detail on, but I'm not a fan of it. And I think that this is an aspect of Clint Eastwood's most recent films that I'm not the biggest fan of. He puts his politics into his films, and it's become more and more evident in the past few projects. And in this film specifically, he has a very disdain for the press. I say this is a decent film in the sense of it's very well made by Eastwood and very good acting by the select few that I mentioned. But that's it. Would I watch it again? Probably not. 3 out of 5 bow ties. What happens to love once a marriage ends? Noah Baumbach attempts to show this through Nicole, played by Johansson, and Charlie, played by Driver, who really kind of want the other person to go off and die. The film shows them with the best intentions to amicably divorce, but they end up in a war of sorts. Baumbach is able to work very well in this story, as he himself is a divorced father, but he definitely focuses most on Charlie's side of it, which shows Nicole as an antagonist. And I think that given marriage is a two-side agreement, I don't think that the story works when it only shows one person being an antagonist here. Clearly, both people are trying to fight for one thing, but then you don't look at Charlie as this negative being, you look at Nicole as being this negative person. His bias is so strong that when Driver really pushes his scene that everyone is raving about, it's not necessary, because you already know that he's the protagonist of this story. It's not just this dual thing. And I feel I would enjoy this film a lot more if this imbalance between them wasn't there, and it showed a more equal point of view from each person. If that was done, the story would be much more engrossing. The overall film would be fantastic. However, because of this film's imbalance, it is a very good film with a very big flaw, unfortunately. 4 out of 5 bow ties. With this last film, I am actually very happy the fact that it is a foreign-made film. So I was very excited going into this film. I was saving it up to my last film to watch before I gave my full review. And I'm so glad that I did, because I love this film. I thought it was extremely well made, extremely well written, and the acting is very good. I love the message that it was talking about, or what it was trying to show. The film really shows this disparity between different classes. And I love loved how the movie essentially was showing a realistic disparity, not only obviously between the Kims and Parks, but also from its cinematography. The way how whenever we were showing the Kims, they always had a struggle to get places. They always had to walk up or walk down a really far distance from the Parks house. When we were first introduced to them, they show them searching Wi-Fi, and that's honestly a very relatable quality. But then when you see their home, they're obviously struggling, so much so that when they're fumigating the street for bugs, they leave the windows open just so they can get free fumigation. And so they have to come up with this scam essentially for this other family, Parks, just to get money and start living. And it's such an interesting commentary on how even when you get no longer suffering anymore, that you're willing to now look down on anyone who's lower than you as well. Just because they aren't you, they haven't struggled, but you don't know how much they've struggled. And it's such an interesting commentary on that. That's really shown in the scene where the old housekeeper calls Miss Kim a sister, and Miss Kim basically says, no, I'm not that. What are you doing? And then the Parks are completely oblivious to all of this. Anything that's quote unquote going on beneath them, they think it's nothing. This is just making my life easier and showing that all these people who are hardworking are actually the people who are making their lives easier. For example, when Mr. Park walks up the stairs, his lights turn on, but he thinks it's just motion detector, where it's actually somebody calling out for help. It's just such an interesting commentary on the disparity between these two and how even things are recognized. And at the end of the day, once you get to that point, that's all you care about, and anyone below you doesn't matter anymore. This commentary is very similar to us in some ways in showing the disparity between the poor, different classes, and obviously different races as well. But this one is a little bit more obviously realistic because it's not really a fantasy. This is actually a fairly realistic story, aside from obviously the violence that happens in the end. But when you literally look at it, the stories are very similar in that aspect. With us, they didn't explain everything very well, whereas this one I felt did a lot better of explaining it. Slash made it a little bit more relatable and not as much a horror film, but more a realistic portrayal of how society can be and how that affects climate change, how that affects many different aspects of society. And I thought the direction was amazing, showing this struggle and showing this overall commentary in every aspect of the film. And that's why I really love this film. And it really is just an amazing put together film. 5 out of 5 bow ties. Tune in next time for episode 49, where I give my Oscar predictions. Now, what did you think of the films that I saw? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. The Formal Review is on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The URL is all the same. It's at The Formal Review. Thank you all for tuning in once again, and I appreciate you all listening. I see the numbers, and I'm really thankful for you all. So you don't miss the next episode, please subscribe to your favorite streaming service. The Formal Review is on Spotify, iTunes, Google Music, and much, much more. It's pretty much on any service that holds podcasts. In addition, I always want to grow and improve. Please leave your review on your favorite service. Feel free to also tell me what you want to hear and a film that you want me to review. I do this for you all, and I want to keep this entertaining. Each pair of ears that you give to this podcast allows me to continue. For those who have supported me on a financial basis, I really appreciate the fact that you supported me in that way. For those who want to give financial support, please go to anchor.fm/the-formal-review and click support this podcast. Any donation is really appreciated. As with every episode, I do have music in the background. I do not own the rights to this music, but I put it in there to show support to each film's score. This is an important part of the film and can really bring the film audience into the film's environment. This episode's music is from each film's original soundtrack. Thank you all for tuning in once again, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Formal Review. We hope you'll join us again.